Now, before all the WandaVision stands come at me in the comments or on Twitter, WandaVision was a great show. I love the atmosphere of the show and I love the idea of the show. I loved the story and the themes that it conveyed. But within that lot of amazing and refreshing new content, there's one massive glaring issue about the entire series, and that's the pacing. The pacing of the show just feels off. Blame it on COVID, rushing production, or just bad writing, the pacing of the show is jarring. I loved the sitcom parts, but when it came to give us answers and to swap from the sitcom to outside the hex, the lackluster pacing really fell through. If your show's A plot is super engaging, but your B plot does nothing to progress the plot or build the characters, what's the point in having a B plot? Especially if, like WandaVision, you're on a super limited runtime. First off, let's actually talk about the show's runtime. Without credits, the show is on average around 22 minutes, which actually fits for your average sitcom. So within the confines of the first 3 episodes, which are actual sitcoms through and through, it's excellent because it fits perfectly, and it works when you're dealing with just Wanda and Vision. The buildup is small. There isn't many massive reveals within those first 3 episodes, only small hints that don't take much time, which works given the time frame. The pacing of small bits of information given to us is paced perfectly within the first 3 episodes. It always gives us enough information to keep us engaged, but never enough for us to get the full story, leaving us searching and waiting for answers. But the build-up never gets too large, where to the point it needs a lot of time to explain or to give exposition for. It's only once you get into the big reveals around and after episode 4, where its short runtime starts to hold it down. It felt like I was being whipped around from place to place, switching from sitcom to outside the hex, juggling A, B, even sometimes C plots, all in the span of 20 to 30 minutes, while also building things up and making big reveals. And that is a near impossible job to do. The show could have just kept focus on Wanda and Vision rather than having to do B and C plots with Jimmy, Darcy, and Monica, especially since their stories don't amount to much other than just simple exposition. The problem is more prominent, especially once you reach the final episodes. The show's entire character and plot development in the finale and in those final episodes are completely stunted by the lack of pacing. They did my boy Hayward absolutely dirty. He had the makings of actually a pretty compelling villain. His main job was to free Westview from Wanda's grasp and to stop her from hurting more people at any cost. He saw that the people of Westview were being hurt, being controlled, being manipulated, and he just wanted to do the right thing and stop it. His only villainous flaw was that he did it with very little understanding or remorse for Wanda and her situation. His character's view was understandable, but not justified.
You don't bother me. I won't bother you.
I wish it could be that simple. You've taken an entire town hostage.
Which has all the makings of a pretty solid villain. And then this just happens.
No, stand down!
Like, what? He suddenly becomes some major dickhead who's willing to execute 2 kids in the middle of the street. How could a villain go from wanting to protect people and free Westview to being willing to shoot a pair of children? The development of Hayward is skipped over completely. He had a very good foundation to build from, but the pacing rushed his development and pushed him into the generic evil bad guy role who just wants a weapon or wants power. The show doesn't give an interesting reason for him becoming a bad guy. He just is for either no reason or a really generic reason. We could have seen him develop from a man who does the wrong things for the right reasons, a flawed man who means well, but transforms throughout the show as he loses soldiers to Wanda, and as Wanda starts to become more and more of a threat, he becomes more and more desperate to stop her, forcing him to cross lines and venture onto a darker path. But instead, his character is boiled down to a generic evil military dude that wants to shoot kids and turn the Vision into a weapon. Speaking of boiled down and unexplained, let's talk about the character development of Monica Rambeau. Monica goes from a pretty somewhat grounded character who believes in Wanda and opposes Hayward, to some hero with powers that aren't explained and that aren't pre-established. I know that they do have to set up Photon for Captain Marvel 2 or whatever the hell, but they couldn't even explain to us that she actually has powers or pre-establish them. They just suddenly appear when she needs them. After she enters the Hex for the second time with her powers, she doesn't really do anything there except be held hostage by Ralph Bohner.
Agnes doesn't live here. You do. You're Ralph Bohner?
Boner.
Besides that point of Ralph Bohner, Monica's story never intersects with Wanda, and she doesn't really affect Wanda's story at all, which is fine. She doesn't need to. Her character was there to provide some good exposition and set up a layered and interesting character to further develop in Captain Marvel 2. But she's given just so much focus for a character who, while had a good story, was simply inconsequential. Now, her story being there could have been fine, but like I said before, WandaVision's pacing means that more time on Monica means less time developing Wanda and her side of the story. Especially in the finale, Monica is just there. For a character who's given so much focus, she does basically nothing. She doesn't convince Wanda to fight Agatha, she doesn't help Wanda fight Agatha, she doesn't even stop Hayward, which was actually something I thought she would do, as Hayward was sort of her villain. But in the end, the only thing she does is exchange a few words with Wanda. And the same can be said with Jimmy Woo and Darcy. The whole Sword storyline provided a lot of needed exposition, but the show spent more time than it needed on it. After episode 4, the inclusion of these characters should have been kept to an absolute minimum. Their side story contributed essentially nothing thematically and story-wise. For example, look at episode 7 and Darcy's involvement with it. It accomplishes nothing, literally nothing. All that happens in this story is a minuscule amount of growth for the Vision, but a lot more could have been done if they chose another B plot or simply just went full on and focused only on the A plot. It would have been best to reduce these characters' screen time or to have them just straight up not appear in some episodes, as the story is simply just not as interesting as the main story. But even when it comes to the main story also suffers from pacing.
For the flying saucers.
My husband and his indestructible head.
Because no matter how much WandaVision wants to trick you into thinking it's a sitcom, it's not. At its very core, it is essentially a Marvel movie. A Marvel movie with multiple story threads and setups for future projects all going on at the same time. In your usual sitcom, you only have to balance usually an A or B plot, maybe even sometimes a C. And a sitcom doesn't have anything to build up to. It's not serialized. It doesn't have to pay things off 2 or 3 episodes later. It just hits its points and finishes. But with a Marvel movie, that has to build up to a satisfying conclusion. It has to pay off eventually in the end. Next movie, next episode, either way, it has to conclude all the points that it sets up. That's the difference between how you can set up a satisfying sitcom episode into a short run of 20 minutes, but not a Marvel project into a 20-minute runtime. But the real problem lies in that the show can't just be build-up. Because for what I'd argue, about 85% of the show just builds up and up and up, but it never hits the crescendo. If WandaVision really wanted to include all those threads, all that build-up, they needed more time. They should have had a longer runtime, because there's no point of having such excellent, such perfect build-up if that payoff is just gonna land flat. If you have to work with such a short runtime and you know the format and how your show should be, you need to balance your time. A show with such a limited runtime that needs to hit specific threads and specific setups should not be so one-sided in balancing its story. Yet WandaVision does exactly the opposite. It tries to set up threads for future MCU products, lays the groundwork for the finale by teasing Hayward and Sword's involvement, Agatha's reveal, Ralph fucking Bohner, just to name a few. So because of its overusage of build-up, when it comes time to pay that build-up off and conclude all those threads and all those stories together, well, it leads to...
Did I leave the oven on, or is that just you, hot stuff?
The WandaVision finale is broken. Plain and simple. In my opinion, it is just broken. It had too much to resolve with such little time. And while the episode before the finale was actually really good, I think that they should have made the finale, or at the very least extend the finale to be an hour runtime, which I think everybody thought, because there was a rumor saying that the last 3 episodes were to be an hour long, but in reality, they weren't. So they ended up just cramming all the answers, all the conclusions, into one episode, which is how we get rushed character development for Hayward, and the episode sort of coming off like a checklist. The finale had so much to do and such little time. It had to deal with 8 episodes of build-up and only had 1 episode to actually truly conclude. The result was an episode that felt like it was just there to hit the points and leave. It didn't really have much substance other than the end where Wanda had to say goodbye, which was actually a really beautiful moment. But other than that, the conclusions to the character arcs felt half-baked, stiff and unnatural, and the setups for future MCU projects felt inserted and not natural. And in the end, we got one alright CGI flying fight, which was a pretty undeserving way to make Wanda the Scarlet Witch, because she doesn't really earn the title in any way. Agatha sort of tells her, "You're the Scarlet Witch," and she becomes the Scarlet Witch, despite her doing pretty horrendous things. But while the Agatha fight was, in my opinion, pretty sloppy, the Vision and White Vision fight was really well done, offering more than just another CGI fight, but also setting up threads for the Vision to return really well and in a really natural manner. But for every well done and emotional scene in the show, there's a greater or equal scene that's just as stupid. But in the end, WandaVision is still a good show. It has a lot of good stuff in it, both conceptually and story-wise. However, the execution of these ideas and themes that WandaVision presents at times come off as weak. The show could have been so much more. It just needed more time. There was too much of an emphasis on setting up the world and asking questions, and there wasn't enough time to focus on creating a satisfying answer to the questions that WandaVision posed to the audience. I believe that if WandaVision had readjusted its priorities, or even had more time, or longer episodes, or even just a longer finale, the show could have been so much better. Thank you for watching the video till the very end. If you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, I would be very appreciative. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.